So welcome to this topic 2.5, and in this topic we'll be focusing on the originality of a research problem presented by myself, Professor Muhumuza, and specifically in this topic coming from where we started from, looking at the research problem, looking at the different processes of how we can be able to formulate a convincing scholarly research problem. So this topic 2.5 introduces us to the concept of originality in research. Originality has to be planned right from the level of the research problem. So, originality of research problems is what I'm going to present here. And in this particular slide, I'll be able to present different ways how you can be able to ensure originality of research problems. Number one, you can be able to say something that nobody has said before. And in that way, if you say it in the way nobody has said it before for the first time, therefore, you'll be contributing to your originality of research. Then secondly, you can carry out an empirical piece of work that has not been done before. So your research problem, you should be able to interrogate it. Is it proposing an empirical work that has not been done before by anybody? If yes, then that research problem is original. Then number three, you can be able to synthesize something that has not been put together before. You may find that there have been different researches conducted on different things, but they have not been synthesized or harmonized together. Or you might find that certain things have been done in different contexts, piecemeal, but you decided to be able to conduct a holistic study that brings those different pieces together. And when you do that, it means you are contributing to research. And if you check your problem and find that, for example, it is proposing to synthesize something that has not been synthesized before, then that research problem is original. Number four, making a new interpretation of someone else's material or ideas. You might have access to data that is not analyzed, but also you might have access to research information, but that research information may have been interpreted by another person in a different way. But when you look at it, you think through it, then you are able to interpret it in your own way. And in that case, your research problem will be original. Then number five, you can take a new technique and apply it to an existing area. So you might find that there is an existing area which has been researched. For example, it may be social science, it may be natural science, it may be an area in agriculture, it may be an area in environment. But then you find that there's a new technique which has been developed, for example, in health. Then you apply it in an existing area like agriculture, like environment, like ecology. And in that case, when that happens, your problem will be considered original. Then also, taking an existing technique and applying it to a new area. So you may already be having, for example, a technique, it may be a methodology, it may be a process, it may be an approach. But that approach has been applied in a particular area. For example, you might find that that particular approach has been applied in the business context and never in environment or never in agriculture. You can be able to decide, therefore, to use that technique and apply it in a new area. And in that case, when you do that, also your problem will be considered original. All right, let's continue with the originality of research problems. You can also be cross-disciplinary and use different methodologies. So you may find that a certain methodology has been used in one academic discipline and not in the other. So you can be able to have what we call a cross-disciplinary study which integrates different disciplines and different methods. When you do that, you also contribute to originality of the research. Then number 8, you can look at topics that people in the chosen discipline have not looked at before. So for example, you might find that in the context of environment, in the context of natural resources management, in the context of agroecology, in the context of agribusiness, scholars have not looked at the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Therefore, for example, you can be able to look into that area and then you research it. Maybe nobody has looked at it before, and that when you is done, it means that you are contributing to the originality of your study. Number 9, you can add new knowledge in a way that has not been done before. So knowledge generation is much to do with the product, with the result, with actually an action of thinking. So you may think differently and contribute knowledge in a way that has not been done before by any other person. And when you do that and you find that your problem statement does that, it means that your problem statement is original. Number 10, you can test existing knowledge in an original way. So you may find that there's an existing knowledge. For example, if we know that pi is equal to 22/7, you might be able to design a method of testing it and proving it empirically in an original way. Therefore, in that case, also that can be a contribution to research. Writing down a new piece of information for the first time can also be considered as original research. For example, there may be some communities that have not been studied. You may find that there is a certain methodology of preservation of beans, which, for example, has been implemented or applied by communities living maybe in a mountainous area, or maybe in some fishing communities, or in some forest dwelling communities. You find they have a certain, for example, method of preserving fruits and they last long on the shelf. In that way, if you document that piece of information for the first time, you'll be contributing to new knowledge. And then number 12, also you can continue a previously original piece of work. You may find that some piece of work originally was conducted, but never concluded. So you can be able to carry on and continue and bring it up to the end. In that way also, you find that you are contributing originality to your research. And then lastly, bringing new evidence to bear witness or to bear confirmation on an old issue. There may be some issue that was discussed and maybe discarded by lack of evidence. In your research, you can be able to bring evidence so that you can bear witness, or that evidence can underpin an old issue, either by proving it or disapproving it. So here I provided these 13 different ways on how you can be able to ensure that your research problem is original. So when you think about a research problem that you want to undertake, you need to be able to assess it against these criteria to see in which dimension does it contribute originality. So let me now present something that is important about considerations that you need to keep in mind when you are choosing a research problem. Sometimes people choose research problems and they get paralyzed. They don't proceed with those research problems. Or others choose research problems, they try to investigate them and they get stuck. So there are some considerations at every stage that you need to take into account when you're investigating the research problem. So number one is how much choice you have. So there are some of those research problems that are dictated by an institution where you work, or even are dictated by research mentor, research supervisor that you're working with. So it means that in that case, you have to consider the interest of the institution, the interest of the mentor, the interest of the supervisor, and you don't have much choice. Number two, your motivation. What is the motivation for you to undertake a certain research? Sometimes you may choose a research that you undertake starting with a master's degree qualification, starting with a bachelor's degree qualification, or even a PhD qualification, and knowing that that particular research is going to be applicable even after you have completed your academic course, and it becomes part of your career, maybe becomes part of provision of a solution to the community. So that becomes your motivation for choosing a particular research problem. Then number three, also you can consider the regulations and expectations of the institutions where you work. It may be an organization, it can be maybe a university. You find that there are some regulations and expectations. You find that there are some institutions where you have to undertake primary research. But maybe for you, your research problem is only going to focus on primary research. And yet the expectation and the regulations is that you must do primary research. So in that case, you'll find that you'll not be able to undertake a research that contravenes the regulations and expectations of the institution. Number four, your research or field of study is also very important. Your research subject and the field of study dictates the research problem that you have to pursue. For example, if your research subject or field of study is natural resource management and you are selecting a specific area in a specific natural resource, you'll find that it becomes very hard for you to convince someone that you are going to study the aspects of protons and neutrons and how they behave in atoms. So that becomes something that is outside your subject or field of study. They usually give also this such example. For example, if someone is studying a master's in business administration, or a PhD in business administration, or a bachelor's in business administration and management, but when they come to select a research problem or a research topic, they decide to select, for example, the feeding habits of elephants in the national park. They have nothing to do with the business. So it is important for you to choose your problem from your subject, area, and field of specialization. Also, it is important to focus on the previous examples of research projects that have been undertaken in your institution, also in, for example, your university. So those can be able to guide a choice of the research problem that you choose. And also, it is important to review them such that you can be able to see what kind of researches are of interest to that organization, to the university, and what other students, other scholars have researched, and where the gap is, and where you can be able to build on. And that can also very much influence the choice of your research problem, and you need to keep it in mind. Also, another thing to consider is the scope of the research problem. If you undertake a research problem that is too big and yet you are an individual, just one, without even research assistants to do it, it means that you're not going to complete it. So considering the scope of your research is very important for you to be able to move forward on your research problem. If you actually try to bite more than what you can chew and swallow, then eventually you'll find that yourself forced to spit it out. The time available for you to undertake the research is also another consideration. For example, if you're undertaking a research for an academic award, and you very well know that for you to be able to complete your academic qualification, you need 1 year or 2 years. And then you decide to undertake a research which is longitudinal in nature, whereby you are going to monitor something for 5 years before you get results, then it means that you are going to wait to graduate, because what you're undertaking will not generate results within the timelines of your academic work. But also this happens especially when we have research where we need to make quick decisions. So you cannot be able to undertake a study which is going to generate results after 2 years, and yet you need to understand and make interventions immediately. For example, there was a case where someone was studying, uh, uh, actually there were buffaloes in a certain national park. They were infested by certain type of I think virus, and they were dying. And then quickly it was necessary to undertake research to understand the origin of that virus and how it can be addressed. But instead of someone undertaking that kind of research, which requires, which actually should be done in a limited time, decided to study longitudinally how these different animals were dying until all of them had completely died. But he had results about how they were dying. So there are some studies which are important uh, to be conducted in a specific timeline, specific limits of time, so that you can be able to complete and generate findings to inform the next course of action. So that is another consideration when you are choosing a research problem. Another consideration is the cost of the research. Research is an expensive undertaking. It requires costs. It requires costs where you have to pay personnel, the research team that you are working with. They may be research assistants, but also other what we call operational costs or reimbursables, like transport, like stationery. For example, you may need to give airtime and the communication costs. So you need to consider the cost of conducting the research vis-a-vis the resources you have available. Number 9, this also considers the resources that you have available in terms of the human resource, the team and the expertise that you are going to engage in undertaking that particular research. So you need to consider the human resource alongside point number 8, where you're looking at the financial resource. Because you might have finances, but you don't have the adequate technical resource to conduct the research. Okay, but also you might have the adequate technical resources, but you don't have adequate financial resources. So 8 and 9 must all be able to be matched for you to be able to undertake the research project successfully, and that influences your choice of the research problem. Then number 9, you need support where necessary. You need to decide where do you need support and where does the research project does not need support. So if, for example, you find that you are limited in terms of your statistical analysis, then it is important for you to consider support from a statistician. And therefore, you must be able to be aware that that support can be available, and also you have the resource to hire that kind of support. So it is important for you to undertake research knowing where your limitations are and where your strength is. Number 11 is information access and availability issues. Sometimes you may consider doing a research whereby to collect data that needs to inform your research is a Herculean task. You may find that you don't have rights, you don't have permission to access information. There is one time a student proposed a research to undertake on the environmental effects of a certain company that was producing milk. So the student presented the proposal, and the proposal was accepted. The student requested for an introductory letter to the field, which was granted, and went. to that factory that was making milk. He introduced himself and told the factory management that he had come to do a research to find out the environmental effects of their factory, and that's why he was there and wanted uh, people, the managers of that factory, to provide information, access, so that he can be able to do the research. So they received his letter of introduction, and then they told him, okay, well, you can come back uh, the following day. So when the student went back the following day, he found the gate locked. They had provided permission, actually, they had provided directives to the gate person not to allow that person to come in. So it means that there was a limitation in terms of access of information. And in that case, of course, the student could not proceed because he was denied access. So also you need to understand that whether it is access to primary data or access to secondary data, you must be very much aware that you need access. And then lastly, you need to consider the methods for researching. So the problem that you are proposing to research, do you have adequate uh, available methodology to research that particular issue? Also, this reminds me of another student who was interested in researching the effect of alcohol on the production of antidiuretic hormone. For some of you who remember some of these physiological processes of production, for example, of urine, I think at some point the student thought that whenever there is uh, uh, drinking of alcohol, usually people tend to urinate quite often. So this student thought that he wanted to investigate that kind of relationship. But when he came to present, he was asked, what methods are you going to use to be able to investigate that? And the student said that he was going to be drinking alcohol and then trying to test how often he goes to the Jones for, or goes to the loose for the short call. And that method actually was not permissible because it had a number of issues. So the student did not have adequate grasp of the methods of researching that particular issue that you wanted to research, and actually the research hit a dead end. So these are the different issues that you need to bear in mind when you are choosing a research problem. At every one stage, you need to think through these. It may be at the time of formulation of the research problem. It may be at the time of writing a problem statement. It may be at the time of refining it. It may be at the time of evaluating it against the available literature. It may be at the time of collecting data, but it is important that at every stage you have to consider these aspects because they highly influence the success of your research project. So, in summary, of course, we are coming to the end of our topic uh, 2.5 and specifically uh, referring to topic 2 in general. Rather, the bottom line, why you need to identify a research and a research problem is to bridge an existing gap. And this existing gap is identified through extensive literature reviews. And by this statement of identifying a gap and basing that gap on existing extensive literature review leads us to our third topic, which is about literature review. But for now, it is important that before we go into that topic, our third topic on literature review, we undertake this assignment. So this assignment has two parts. Part 1 requires you, from your area of specialization. Remember, we have talked about area of specialization, and I hope by now you know your area of specialization. You need to identify and read 5 journal articles published not earlier than the year 2022, and identify the originality of research communicated in those articles. So, what this first question requires you to do is to identify 5 journal articles in your area of specialization, and it is important for you to understand what the journal articles are. When you are presenting this, you should be able to give information about each of the journals that you have identified by the title of the journal article, the authors, the year of publication, and the details of the publisher. And then you indicate under that, or depending on how you have structured it, if it is a table, in the column, you identify the originality of the research communicated. What is that particular issue that you think this research was original? What did it contribute based on the other points that they shared on originality? Then the second question requires you to prepare a problem statement of not more than 1,500 words, still from your area of specialization. Identify and rate a problem statement. And this should be done together with the question 1 and the 2 submitted within 2 weeks. So this marks the end of topic 2.5 and also the end of topic 2 in general. I look forward to meeting you in topic 3, which will focus on the review of literature.